So we'll get started just now. Uh, and first of all, welcome for those of you who joined. This presentation is looking at some of the work we'll be doing over the January period in India. This coming January, I'll be taking two groups. The first will be a week long in Udaipur, which is a beautiful city on the lake. And in that first week together, we'll be looking at the Bhagavad Gita. The second week, we then move across to Varanasi, and the second week will be a week in which we explore the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. This presentation, though, we look at the Bhagavad Gita and the Sutras, their relationship to one another. These two texts are seen as yogic. They are the two most significant texts within yoga, along with the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. The Bhagavad Gita is part of the Mahabharata, and it's a 700-verse Hindu scripture. It presents a conversation between Arjuna and Krishna, who serves as his charioteer. The Yoga Sutras, in contrast, is this very terse 196, they're called sutra, short, terse statements, no description, formed into 4 chapters called Samadhi Pada. Then following that is the second chapter, Sadhana Pada. Then comes the chapter on attainments, Vibhuti Pada. And then the 4th chapter is Kaivalya, on freedom. In contrast, the Bhagavad Gita is a rich story, a story of conflict, both external and internal conflict. And the Bhagavad Gita is structured around a battlefield. It's the perfect backdrop because the story is the story not so much of an external battle, but of a man's inner anguish. We meet Arjuna, and he, in fact, is a warrior. He's part of what are called the warrior caste. His job, essentially, is to go out and fight. But Arjuna is deeply conflicted for reasons that we find out in the Gita, because on the battlefield below him are his cousins, his teachers, essentially his extended family, and they're about to come into conflict. This war is about to unfold. And what goes on in the Gita is a conversation between Krishna and Arjuna. And Krishna offers these insights, ways to think about what is about to unfold. He doesn't actually offer Arjuna alternatives. He doesn't say to Arjuna, look, you could get a sick leave or you could opt out. Krishna essentially is finding ways for Arjuna to understand, to make sense of, and to find purpose in what is about to unfold. Even though for us in our modern world, this sounds like a troublesome event. Troublesome in that none of us would seek to be in Arjuna's position, and most of us would seek to avoid it. So for us, it seems difficult to understand what sort of conflict Arjuna is in. But even today, in today's world, where we see wars in Ukraine, in Gaza, these things are real and they affect people's lives deeply. But in our own small world, in our own inner world, we struggle with the same conflicts. How to make sense of what we have to do and how to find clarity in what we choose to do. It's said that to understand the Gita, you have to understand Dharma, and karma. Dharma is duty. And we think of duty as the jobs or the roles that we have. You might have a work role that requires great responsibility. You might have a family role to those around you. You might have a role in society. You might be seen in a certain way. And these are external. We could say these are one's duties to oneself and society. But what we'll find and what we see when we look into the word Dharma is this responsibility to oneself, to be true to oneself. And this is one of the most important things in Dharma, how to come close to understand oneself, how to find clarity of meaning in what we do and what we choose to do, and even the things that we feel we need to do, and maybe even those things that we find difficult. The second principle is karma, which I could describe as motivation. Karma is often characterized in modern society as a sort of a we'll get you back, or you deserved it anyway. But karma is much more significant. It involves cause and effect. All actions have outcomes. And what we seek to do is to generate actions which have good, sometimes described as virtuous outcomes. But what it recognizes is that what we do affects the world, others, but also affects ourselves. And so within karma, there is a very powerful questioning of motivation. In her book, Yoga, a Gem for Women, Gita Iyengar makes the following statements. There are four paths to self-realization: the path of knowledge, the path of action, the path of devotion, and the path of yoga. Though the paths are different, they lead to the same goal. The path of knowledge enables one to discriminate between good and evil, to follow right conduct, to discriminate between nature and soul, to attain self-realization, and finally to be one with God. The follower of the path of action considers service to humanity as service to God. Good actions and fulfillment of one's duty lead to liberation. The pursuer of devotion sees the presence of God in every animate and inanimate object. A devotee, a bhaktan, is full of love for every living thing and attains liberation with God's name ever on his lips. The follower of the path of yoga learns to control the fluctuations of the mind, to stabilize it in order to perceive the inner self, and through this self, which is crystal clear, the supreme is realized. So Gita Iyengar and the Gita recognizes four paths: the path of knowledge, the path of action, the path of devotion, and the path of yoga. Excuse me. And so we have karma marga. You have the right to work, but never to the fruits of work, says Krishna. And what he's saying is that we act, but if we act always seeking benefit to ourselves, always with self-interest, then in essence, we distort the action. I want to read a section from the essence of the Bhagavad Gita, by Eknath Eswell, in which he says the second path is karma yoga, the way of selfless action. This way appeals to those who want to make some contribution to the welfare of others. But karma yoga is more than service work that benefits others. It is necessary for every human being, the Gita maintains. It is incumbent upon us to give back to life as we take from it. But this becomes yoga only when it is selfless, when we forget ourselves in that work and desire nothing from it for ourselves, not even recognition or appreciation. When we learn to act in this way, egoism shrinks and separateness gradually dissolves. So the word karma means not only actions, but the consequence of actions. In the fullest sense of the word, every action has effects which go on to become causes in an endless chain of cause and effect. The virtue of karma yoga is that when we act without thought of self, there is no channel for the results of our actions to act upon us again. Every human being has an immense load of past karma, actions that must have effects. But each of these fails to become a fresh cause. The burden of karma is reduced. And when it is reduced to zero, the Gita says, there is nothing to compel action. And so we go on to Jnana Marga. The word Marga means a path, and Jnana Marga is the path of knowledge. And again, Eswaran, Jnana Yoga, the path of wisdom or knowledge, appeals to many people today because we're so intellectually orientated. But jnana has very little to do with the intellect. It transcends the intellect. It is direct experiential knowledge of the unity of life, attained by progressively seeing through the layers of delusion that glue us to the body and mind. Something that is simple to talk about, but almost impossible to do. Krishna describes the goal and the qualifications of this path in beautiful verses. As for those of you who seek the transcendental reality, without name, without form, contemplating the unmanifested beyond the reach of thought and of feeling, with their senses subdued and their minds serene, and striving for the good of all beings, they too will verily come unto me. This path, Jnana Marga, the path of knowledge, is said to be very difficult, even though, as Eswaran notes, we like to think of ourselves as intellectual. We like to think of the path of Jnana Marga as the intellectual path, but it transcends that. The third path is Bhakti Marga, often translated as devotion to God. And it's sometimes said a God or a deity of your choosing. There is a much larger subject around the Bhagavad Gita that exists on the study website called Yoga Vidya. And in this very extensive subject, I look into the various views on bhakti, on Ishvara, the word Ishvara, which means God. But it's a personal thing, an experience. In this case, bhakti or devotion can be seen in more than just devotion to a chosen God. And here I'll read again from Eswaran because he brings a very nice texture to this whole subject, and I quote him at many points. He says, love or personal devotion is the most powerful motivation in spiritual life. The world's greatest religions agree on this point. All religions allow for a way of devotion, and millions of men and women have found spiritual fulfillment in devotion to Christ, the Buddha, or Muhammad. Hinduism has allowed for a place for the path of knowledge as well as the path of devotion. However, the Gita stresses the efficacy of devotion. The Upanishads, the final word on mystic experience uttered by the Vedas, stress the ultimate reality, the eternal truth behind the ephemeral things of this world. The teachers of the Upanishads told their students to seek knowledge of the Atman, their true self. The consummation of this knowledge was to know that the self was one with Brahman, the ultimate reality pervading all things. This was encapsulated in the statement, "You are that." The Gita speaks of devotion or love, but it is the experience of loving that changes us. The experience of giving, of experiencing that oneness with others. It is not what we get from that devotion, not safety, security, but the act of allowing oneself to experience a selflessness, which is the path of bhakti. The Bhagavad Gita goes on to talk about Raja Yoga, the path of meditation. Raja meaning the king, the kingly yoga. In many ways, it includes the practices or emphasizes meditation and mind control. And it's at this point that we see the merging of the sutras and the Gita. One way to think about the Yoga Sutras is that it is the practical steps to achieve Raja Yoga. The Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Yoga Sutras, both texts emphasize the importance of discipline, self-control, and meditation. The Yoga Sutras provide a detailed methodology for achieving the states described in the Gita. For example, the Yoga Sutras, Patanjali gives us two sets of practices. He says you can practice abhyasa and vairagya, action and dispassion, or you can practice the kriya, made up of tapas, svadhyaya, and ishvara pranidhana, made up of application, self-study, and surrender. These two texts mesh beautifully. Yoga is the journey to the self, through the self, to the self. In essence, the Yoga Sutras ask us to study ourselves, and this may involve periods where we step away from the busyness of life. It's really held in this self-study model. We have a practice, we apply our practice, and we observe ourselves. And we seek to cleanse our actions of mixed motivation. So the principle of karma yoga, to act selflessly, is applied within the sutras, within the practice. But also the path of action exists within yoga. We act. Each day we go to our mats, we apply ourselves. So karma marga exists. And devotion. We give up our likes and our dislikes. We move beyond our self-centered nature. What Patanjali talks about in the Yoga Sutras is, in a way, exactly meshed with what is spoken of in the Bhagavad Gita. Both focus on the effects in daily life. Even though the sutras, you might step out of the world to do your practice, whereas the Gita looks, can you act selflessly within your daily life? But each of them has a common thread of practice, something that we work on, and self-reflection. Both recognize human suffering, that human beings suffer, and that clarity of action overcomes both I-ness, self-centeredness or ego, but it also lifts us above and beyond. And so we act in the world, we act for others, not merely for our own interest. The Bhagavad Gita and the Yoga Sutras are two extraordinary texts which guide the practice of yoga. And in this coming period, in this January, where we spend a week together in Udaipur, and then the second week I'll be in Varanasi teaching on the sutras. But I hope in that time to spend time with the group, to give you maybe some tasks to think about as you move about through your day. Maybe we'll have time together where we can talk through some of the themes and questions in these two beautiful texts. For those of you who are thinking of coming, I'd also guide you to the subject, to enroll in the subject on Yoga Vidya, to prepare yourself for this journey that we take together, for the time that you and I will spend together in India, to enrich ourselves and to enrich one another through our dialogue, through our discussion. So I look forward to spending time with you, those who have enrolled, and obviously for those who are thinking, I would strongly recommend that you get in soon. Thanks for your time. Thanks for listening.